So little time and so much to talk about. And so, just as a heads up, we are going to do our questions at the end. So, welcome everyone. Marketing, testing, and optimization. This relates to CSI number 7. If you don't know what CSI is, we'll talk about that. So, no worries. We are going to be talking about how to optimize Pardot, how to optimize your marketing automation, and just your marketing in general and the approach to testing. A lot of fun stuff to talk about. And first, before we begin, go ahead and let's keep this interactive. I don't know if anyone's been on a really boring webinar lately. I've had my fair share. So go ahead and in the Zoom webinar chat or even in the question interface, whatever you would like to do, go ahead and hop in there and answer these questions. Do you do any testing yourself right now? Or does your company, does your team, does your marketing team do any testing? And if so, what do you test? And if no, yeah, write no in there. Subject lines mostly. Yeah, I see some no's. I see yes. What do you test? What kind of things do you test? Go ahead and throw those in the chat. This is our informal chit chat here instead of a poll. Okay. A couple other folks have shared in the Q&A box. I see different things. Up, got some other folks. Yep. Different imagery in the ads, content. Ooh, colors. John, we're going to get to colors today. I'd be interested to hear what your experiences were. Could do more. Yeah, this is how I feel. This is what we're seeing. So you're not alone. We see some yeses, we see some nos, we see some people doing a few things here and there. We are going to answer this once and for all. I am your crazy mad scientist for today. Welcome to the marketing laboratory. I know it's kind of a creepy picture, but the modern science of imagery. Quick things, if you haven't met me yet, if you haven't been able to join us on one of these webinars, we do at least 2 a month talking about these strategies. My name is Casey, founder and CMO of Cheshire Impact. A couple quick stats and we'll get right on to it. 10, that's the number of years I've been working with Pardot and marketing automation. I've been doing marketing for quite a while, but I've been doing marketing automation for about 10. Love it. Love the strategy around it. 2,200. It's a little higher than that now, is roughly the number of Pardot implementations Cheshire Impact has done, and I've been able to be a part of in one way or the other. And it's been an honor and very exciting. So a lot of the strategies you're going to hear, all the success stories, and even the failures you're going to hear that we can all learn from, they all came from working with all these amazing people. And if you're on here and if you're a Chesh client as well, welcome. If you've never met any of us before, welcome. And you're going to be in for a fun ride. Lastly, that number 32, that's the number of skydives that I've done. Hopefully the weather will be clearing up this spring and I'll be able to get a couple more in there. All right, let's talk what we're going to cover today. So in case you're not sold on staying for the whole thing, you will be at the end of this. So first, we're going to talk about when is the right time to do testing and just how much. A lot of times people jump right into testing and they're not ready for it yet. And you don't have enough volume. So by the way, anyone that said no earlier, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might be okay. But marketing is a lot of fun and it's a lot of optimization and testing. So there's a good time to do it. We'll talk about when. Then we'll talk about why. We've got some great case studies and I've got some results from lots of tests. And I just basically stripped out all the details and gave you the results and what they did to make the results happen. So you could even just copy that slide, go implement those things and be on your way. But stick around for that. Next, what to test. So you decided testing is great. We'll get some great results, but what should I test? And it's not going to be the color of the button in the form. That's been answered. So stick around for section 3. We know what color to use in the button to make it convert the most people. I'll tell you about it then. After that, we'll talk about how to test. What is the testing? The idea of there's a process to it. There's a mad science to it. And also talking about A/B testing versus multivariate testing. Lots of strategy, right? All this first half is going to be very strategic because what ends up happening is whether you know how to do it in Pardot or not, if you're doing the wrong thing or you're kind of testing some random thing that doesn't actually matter, then the results won't really be that much different and it won't be worth it. So it's important to know the strategy first, the process, and then the technology. And we will definitely do that. We're going to hop into Pardot for a little bit. Got some great screen grabs I created earlier today related to it. We're going to talk about A/B testing in Pardot. We're also going to talk about multivariate testing in Pardot. And not everyone has that in their Pardot account, but we'll talk about what it looks like and show you if you don't have that. So you'll know what it looks like for when you do get that level of Pardot. Finally, there are some traps to do with testing, and these are actually really important. So I'm I'm promised not to talk too fast like I'm in the Micro Machines commercial, but if I need to, I will, because we need to cover the testing traps, because all the things 1 through 5 could be completely blown up if you don't do what's in 6. Then finally, we'll leave off with some great resources. I'm in a lab coat, which studies show that everyone perceives you as that much more intelligent and smarter. It's weird. I learned it from someone, though, and I'm going to share with you the even bigger experts in these particular topics that you can go and listen to in the podcasts all related to that. Q&A. Normally in these webinars, we do Q&A throughout because it's fun. But today there's so much to cover. We're actually going to hold Q&A to the end. So that doesn't mean you need to stop asking questions. Just go ahead and you can throw them in the quick Q&A interface whenever they happen. That way you don't forget them by the end. But you throw them in the Q&A interface, and we're going to kind of ignore them for now, but then answer them at the end. That way, if anyone needs to drop, they can. Anyone wants to stay, they can as well. All right. So there's a lot. It's going to be fun, though. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Do you know from the movie there, in the movie Back to the Future, right? We're trapped in the past, and there's this plan. I got to go down Main Street. You got to drive a certain miles per hour. By the way, does anyone remember how fast you need to drive in the DeLorean to get back to the future? Does anyone know? Go ahead and throw it in the chat if you remember how fast you need to drive to get back to the future. But Doc has a plan, right? He says, we're going to go down the street, and then right when the clock strikes midnight, the lightning's going to strike it. It's going to go down. The car's going to connect, and then we're good, right? So that's the plan to get back to the future. But what happens if you do that in the wrong order, or if you don't get there in time? If the lightning strikes and then the car gets there 5 minutes later? Well, then Marty's stuck in the past. It doesn't work. Well, just like there's an order to Doc's plan, we've created an order to how to do marketing automation, and it's a strategic roadmap. There's also an assessment attached to it. So what it is, there's 10 steps to it. There's 10 strategies, and it's called the Cheshire Success Index. And we abbreviate that by calling it the CSI. And the reason I tell you this is because in marketing automation, and even when it comes to testing, there's some things we need to get done before it's time to do testing. But once you've gotten those things done, you can go just crazy with your testing. And that's where this webinar really kicks in. So that assessment, if you haven't done a CSI, it's very easy. That'll be one of the call to action. One of the next steps from this webinar is to sign up to do a CSI. What you get from it, it's about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. It's a conversation. It's not an app. And we ask 10 questions related to 10 assets and strategies in Pardot and marketing automation. And based on the answers, we come up with a number from 0 to 10. And it basically tells you where you're at. And a lot of people have this gut feeling like, I think I'm kind of using marketing automation, but I'm not sure. Well, what this does is it tells you, well, you're 3 out of 10. 3 is not incredibly amazing, but at least you know you're 3. So then you can progress to 4, 5, 6. It also tells you what to do next. Oftentimes, I've been there too. You look at Pardot and you say, there's 80,000 things I can do with this. What do I do first? Well, what you do first is the first number CSI, and then the second, and then the third. So you'll know that at the end of this. Finally, you're going to know what a 10 looks like. How do we get back to the future? You're going to know what that 10 looks like. And so the reason I bring that up is because this webinar is relating to A/B testing, marketing optimization, the strategies around that, and also the application of doing that inside of marketing automation, inside of Pardot. And it's CSI number 8. Now, there's a lot of other CSIs before this. And so I only bring that up. We don't have to, quit this webinar until we address all those other things. But it's good to know that there are other steps that need to happen. Things like getting to know your buyers, making sure your data is set up, making sure you have ROI tracking. There's some things you got to do first. But then when you start getting to the later stages of the CSI, and by the way, we have webinars in every single one of the CSI elements. But when you start getting to later elements, it becomes even more fun because now you're just optimizing. And that's why we got in marketing in the first place. So just know that there are some steps you probably need to address first, but it's good to know what the testing is. And listen, I'm not going to come to your office and scold you for doing some testing, even if you're not at CSI 8 yet. That's fine. You don't want to make it a large part of your marketing strategy until you have the volume, until you have the engagement going on. A lot of times people want to test multivariate tests, or they want to test multi-touch ROI tracking, but they don't have touches, right? So that's why we have an order to the chaos. All right, enough on that. Why do we test? We test because it works. Now, it doesn't work all the time, and we'll talk about the ratio of that later on. But when you do stumble on some things that work, it's beautiful. Here is a company called Fluke, which is funny because they're doing an A/B test, and I hope it wasn't a fluke. Waka waka. But their result, by changing up the landing page, they tightened it. Look, the layouts changed, and that form looks a lot smaller. It's above the fold, and there's only a few fields in there. That's because they went progressive profiling. In Pardot, you can have a shorter form. They did a lot of these things. They call it the treatment. This is a MECLab study, great resource to check out. And one of the things you'll see is that it increased their conversions by 96%. That means they didn't do anything else. They didn't drive more traffic there. All the traffic that was coming through, 96% more people completed that. That's amazing. And that's not the only thing that can happen. Here's some great studies. Crazy Egg had some good examples. I threw some other ones in there. These are the takeaways. So if there's something to remember, something to take, write down, strategies are great, but here's just some little tactical things that these companies have done that have really improved them. Now, I say this because it may or may not, the results may vary, but for these companies, this is what they did. And these are the kind of things you can expect. One group, they swapped generic images for real life examples. We'll talk about why that works. Things improved, replacing a slider with a search bar. One that I had a chance to see the picture of, they had this really gross, mush of words and ad copy, and it looked corporate-y, and they changed it and they simplified it. They cleaned up. They minimized the copy. They changed the picture, 433%. Another group moved their form above the fold. What that means is when you first land on a website, you see the form and you don't have to scroll down to get to it. Increased their conversions by 220%, right? Great stuff, great learnings that can be had by doing testing. These are amazing things. And these are the kind of results we want to see. And this is what I want you to be able to do by the end of the webinar. One other thing, why test? Because it's fun. That's why we got into marketing in the first place. It's this weird mishmash of the creative side and the measurement side, right? And I think we all have the side that we prefer, but a lot of times what you see in marketing is we dabble a little bit of both, right? And we don't know if we're more creative or more scientific. Sometimes we are just right in the middle. We love that where it comes together and you can both test, be creative and try some crazy idea, and then just test it. And I think the other part of this is, testing can really get rid of politics in an organization. Look, your idea, my idea, rather than just shooting it down, let's do a test and see what works. The numbers will show what the right idea is. And so instead of having to sort of get behind one or the other, we can go ahead and just open up the floodgates, have some crazy ideas, and then see what happens. And that's what I really love about testing. All right, but what do we want to test? Okay, we're all inspired. We're like, Casey, give me some of those results. So how do I get those for my company? Okay, well, there's a lot of things to test here. So let's talk about what to test. And I think one of the common challenges that can happen is we just want to test everything, right? And then it takes our time and attention away from other strategies. Or we test maybe the smaller, safer, minimal thing. So let's get into it. First of all, and I know some of you shared color testing earlier on, and I think images and color can really have make a difference. But I got to tell you what, the button test. When I was on the podcast, and I'll share with you, Brian Massey, great guy. He shared, all he does is testing. All he does is landing page conversion testing, and he said, Casey, we figured out the right color for the buttons to convert them the most. Go ahead and in the chat, go ahead and throw down what color button do you think converts the most at the highest percentage? What color, is it red? Is it blue? Is it green? Go ahead and throw your guess down there. I see orange, light blue, sky blue, yellow. Yeah, place your bets, people. Place your bets on the roulette board here. I see greens, oranges. Awesome. I love this. And while you're putting these all down, the red, I once as a earlier marketer, when I was in my early marketing days, you see down here, they have these gray buttons down here, and they were really gross. And in the company I was at, that's what they had for buttons, these little gray buttons. So I put in this request to the graphics team, big internal agency. I said, make me a gigantic button that's fire engine red. And here's what we have currently. And so I waited and waited. Several days, came back. Finally, what did I get? I got the exact same gray button shaded red. I was not impressed, right? Like the gymnast, I was not impressed. But guess what? We didn't have time to swap, to get another request out there. So we tested it, and it actually improved it a little bit, even though it wasn't fire engine red like I asked for. But the answer to this question, a la Brian Massey, who is the optimization scientist, right? Who gifted me the knowledge for this lab coat, is any color that is not in the palette of your page. So I'll say that again. And I know it was a trick question, but thank you all for sharing your guesses. All of your answers could technically be correct. It's any color that's not in the palette of your page. So if your brand colors, like Cheshire Impact Down, right? Obviously we've got white, we've got this orange, we've got this, really nice navy blue going on. That's about it. So what color should we use? Well, anything that's not in that palette, not orange, not white, not blue. Green would be great for us on that. Pink even, just something that sort of pops and stands out. And what's interesting is oftentimes this is in direct argument with the designer who wants to make it all look pretty and make it kind of just flow. That's not what we're looking for. So the button test has been solved, so we no longer ever have to test a button again. If you use a button that has a direct contrast to what's on the page, you will have the highest amount. And then studies have shown, testing different contrasting buttons doesn't really improve it beyond the initial improvement you got having that crazy contrast button, right? So what this does is it frees us up to not keep testing that. And I'll admit, this is what I did. I would test those kind of things because I didn't know what else to test. Well, the good news is there are other things to test. The challenge is oftentimes we get in this technology mindset, right? And what I like to say is you got to think about the strategy first, then the process, then the technology. If you think about the technology first, you get this kind of a graph, which isn't bad, but what it's saying is these are the things that get tested the most. And they're all tactics. And it doesn't necessarily tell you what they're testing with subject line. It just tells you where, right? So it tells you in the technology, they're testing these things. Okay, well, what are they doing? Just saying different crazy subject lines? And, are they using emojis? By the way, emojis work. 89% the folks that were in a test that used them saw an increase in open rates. They work, but why do they work, right? What's the reason, or what kind of a subject line should I test? So what I want to remind us to not do is get caught in the trap of just thinking about, let me test this image, but instead, let me test these different images based on what I think they're going to do based on the overall strategy. And what I mean by that is this. Brian Massey, if you haven't looked him up, he's a great guy. Follow him on Twitter. Had a chance to interview him on the Hardcore Marketing Show. If you just Google Hardcore Marketing Show 39, it's on YouTube. It's also on Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, all those places. He is an awesome guy. And he was actually drinking his coffee out of a beaker. So he's legit, right? I've got a regular coffee mug. He has a beaker he's drinking his coffee out of. But when I was talking to him, because all he does is optimization testing, I said, is there an order to the chaos? Should I start somewhere, right? We have the CSI, which tells us to start somewhere with marketing automation. Where do I start with testing and optimizing? When it's time for me to do that, when I want to dive in and test any one of these numbers, subject lines and images and call to actions, and this is at least an email. What about landing pages? What should I test? These are the 5 things in this order of most importance. And let's just talk about them real quick. So first of all, number 1 thing to test is value proposition. And it's the most important. And the way you want to think about it is, do the words and images I'm using on the page, on the email, on the site, in the collateral, at the booth, do they communicate value? Value meaning something that's important to your visitor, to your prospect. Not important to you, but important to them. And if you think about it specifically, how do we address their challenges, their problems, their pain points? Oftentimes we bump into folks who have created content, and I ask them, what challenge does it address for your buyer? And there's crickets, no answers, because they didn't design it that way. They weren't thinking about that when they created their content. We need to think about that, not just creating our content, but our landing pages and our email as well. what does this communicate? What are we trying to get across? What kind of point are we trying to do? And a quick note, this is, Brian tested this, and this is also something that, I've sort of always felt, but I didn't have the metrics to show it. Stock images are terrible. Please stop using them. Brian has an interesting word for it. I'll let you listen to that on the podcast. It's the Hardcore Marketing Podcast. It's uncensored, unlike this webinar. So he's got his own word for these stock images. But plain and simple, they are pandering to your audience. So whenever you can, eliminate those. It's actually better to not use those. And we'll talk about some images you could use instead of that. But do not do that. It basically can erase or distract from the value you're trying to communicate. So do not do that. Finally, WIIFM, a radio station or a Netflix or a Spotify channel to listen to. What's in it for me? Great phrase to think about. And when you think about that, not what's in it for you per se, but what's in it for that buyer. So pretend you're the buyer, pretend you're the prospect. And as you're looking at your own email with a critical eye, ask what's in it for you, right? What's in it? Like, why should I look at your email? Is this actually helping me with my challenge, or is it some brag piece, or is it full of clip art, right? So value proposition is number one. So for instance, when testing the subject line or testing the email, the header images, any of these things, the question is, do the words and images communicate value, something that's helpful to you? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, that will be what you would want to test first. And this could be, let me try to change the way I'm saying it. Let me change the words in the subject line. So instead of sounding like spam, will sound like something that might actually really help the person receiving it, right? So that would be the first strategy, the first thing you would want to address when doing your testing is, am I communicating value? 2, now we're getting into more of a layout. And very simply, is the layout helping your visitors' eyes get to that value? You may have amazing copy. You may actually be communicating the value left and right. But if your layout is so convoluted or busy, they may never actually get to see it. They may see a bunch of things or get lost. Or I don't know if you've ever seen a newspaper with a bunch of writing. You're just like, I don't know. I don't want to look at that. Or like a legal contract. Oh, tell me about it, right? So number 2, now we start testing layout. We've already done some tests to see if maybe this sentence or that sentence or this image or that image will help convey more value that we're trying to help our buyers. Number 2 is, where are their eyes going? Where do their eyes follow? There's a lot of apps that will actually track the movement of the mouse across your page. Very interesting. It's not necessarily a long-term play, but something you might want to check out in the short term is, where is their mouse going? They typically read from left to right, starting with your logo at the top left, and they kind of read from left to right. They'll scan back and forth, almost like a computer going across. And if they see some things that call out to them, or that bright green button that doesn't fit your page, then it's going to call their attention. So now we start doing different layouts at this phase. So first, when we testing the value, now we're saying, how can we better call out that value? And one interesting point to share here is that there is very much a trade-off between beauty and results. Not always, but sometimes there is. So we want to make sure we don't do is, we don't want to bias ourselves to what looks good versus what might have the best results. And sometimes it's the case, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes there's that form versus function battle. Brian's seen this. We've seen this with a lot of emails that we help send emails as well here at Cheshire. And we've often done tests for clients, and we'll see that sometimes that boring looking plain text personal email doesn't have all the flashy graphics, does way better than that sexy image driven corporate email, right? There's different approaches to it, but don't necessarily bias yourself against one or the other. Number 3, you've tested value, you've tested layout, you're starting to move all those different things, you're feeling good about it. Now you want to cycle through and talk about credibility and authority. This is where these tests come in place here, because these are the paths that the minds of your prospects are following. They're starting with those first couple things. Now they're getting to this point. And the idea is, no one wants to come on the site and like, who are these people? Do they know what they're talking about? So this is where expert quotes come in. This is where having a couple statistics, even like on a slide deck, sometimes I'll put like a gigantic 97%, right, to show something interesting. You're like, oh, that's interesting. There's some stats here, but you don't want to blow those away, right? You don't have too many stats because then people just they get overwhelmed with them. You want a couple maybe prominent stats that show something that shows that you know what you're talking about, that you've got some credibility. And oftentimes there's a word you want to, borrow trust from some of these other sources. So analyst reports are great for that, highlighting that it's not me, but Gartner in their Magic Quadrant over here said X, Y, and Z. Here's their full report without, my explanation on it. Go read this. Awards fit in there too. Also staying current. Like how many times do we have something that's not current on the website? Hey, here's a case study from 2012. And we know how fast life moves here. 2012 seemed on top of everything when it was 2012, but now we're we're almost a decade away. If you have prominent stats or prominent white papers or cases that involve that reduces your credibility by having those outdated things. You got to keep things fresh. Next, social proof. You've tested all these other things. Now we're starting to test social proof. WordStream does a great job with this. This is actually the best one I've seen. I did quite a bit of searching. It's even better than ours. We've got some good ones too. But they did a great job. And this is the kind of images that we want. These are the real images. So you don't need movie star customers, right? We want real people. We don't need that sterile clip art environment that Brian rails on, that pandering to the audience with your clip art. What you really want to do is have pictures of what's actually happening. So if you have manufacturing, it's the actual thing that's happening. If you have it's tech and whatnot, it's the people using it and being successful with it, or the results they're getting from it. Those are the real pictures. So whenever you can, you want to use the real deal, the real people. Jennifer, Tim, great looking folks over here. And what I liked about these examples, customer for over 9 years, and they prominently feature, his company and the website address. Jennifer, customer for over 4 years, social proof, done well, beautiful, well done, WordStream. Because the question we're trying to answer is, what do my peers think? Where's everyone else going for dinner? Are you guys going out here? You guys going out here? You want to see what's everyone else doing, because we don't necessarily want to be the first one to try something. You see this in a lot of industries. Everyone will be second, third, fourth, and fifth, but let's have someone else try this first so that we don't get egg on our face, right? Internally in our own companies. Tim's been there for 9 years. He's successful, looks like a happy guy, happy customer. And he must be happy because he's let them put his face and his web address on the website. So we get it. It's those kind of things that make a difference. Social proof. So really testing that, whether you have that on your landing page or you have that in your email template or not, now would be the time to test it. Finally is trust. And now we're going to start to getting into a little bit about Pardot. This is the what if category. You've tested all the other things, and this becomes important once you've really addressed all the other factors. What we're looking at here in a B2B sense, if there's a form or there's a sign up or registration and it asks for the email, the question they're thinking is, am I going to get spammed from this? Or if it asks for the phone number right away or early on, and you really probably, it kind of is in contrast. You shouldn't ask for the phone number right away unless they want you to call them, right? And like a demo request or a contact us. If they're just trying to get your white paper, asking for phone number right away, it's a little much. So you either don't include that, or you might want to have some kind of phrase, and I've seen this well done underneath. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to send you anything else. A lot of companies, more on the B2B side, will say, we're not going to sell your information. Your information's private. We're going to keep this to ourselves, especially those sites that are asking a little more personal information. What's your company's revenue, things like that. So these are the kind of questions you want to answer at that last stage and last trust stage. Oftentimes, if it's a shopping cart or something like that, you'll see little locks at the bottom of it saying, don't worry, this is a secure site. And that was really started in the B2B side, or B2C side, and it's actually come over to the B2B side lately. And so Pardot has the actual feature. If you have Pardot, this is great. If you don't, you want to look into, does my app have the ability to do this? Pardot has the ability, so all the landing pages and the hosted assets can be hosted with SSL. So security. So it's a secure server, secure connection. And this just used to be something for the B2C folks with the shopping carts, but this has actually become like a web best practice. And so one of the things to know about this in Pardot is that it's relatively straightforward to set up. You're going to see this in domain management on your Pardot side. You want to go down there and you want to see, does it say validated? If it does, you got this thing working. If it doesn't, you got a couple steps to jump through. And mostly it involves code, and it mostly involves just making sure you've got this thing set up so that you can validate that this is a secure server. Now, the reason there's a step, and they don't just automatically do this, is because there's a bit of a danger when you start transitioning over to this. And that is if Pardot is presenting a landing page or a hosted file and it's secure, it's on a secure server, if there's any items in that page, an image, another hosted file, a CSS file for our HTML ninjas out there, if it calls for anything that's not secure, there's a high chance that that image won't show up, or it'll show up with a warning, or with an X, that it'll be blocked because the page is secure, but that file isn't secure. So one of the best ways to do this is if you do, or if you are making the transition over to this, by the way, ping us, or if you're working with someone on our team, you don't have to just go off of one bullet here on the webinar, but this is important to set up. It really is table stakes these days to have all your Pardot files and your landing pages in a secure server. So the reason for that is that, again, back to trust, you're going to get higher conversion rates because people are going to say, okay, secure socket, awesome, beautiful, on a secure server. And they might not normally notice it, but nowadays, they might even get to your page because Google's actually going to make sure that the pages they're sending to are secure, and they start not listing you as high if you're not on an SSL server. And by the way, the way to spot this, and you can see this down below, HTTPS://. If the S wasn't there, it'd be the standard, right? We're all used to that. So just that extra HTTPS means you're on a secure server. So Google wants to make sure it's sending people there, so your SEO, your link juice is going to improve. And then finally, browsers. There's a lot of browsers out there that have started to throw not errors, but they'll throw like massive warnings saying, warning, this site is not secure, especially if it detects a form or a shopping cart. This site is not secure. Somebody could get your credit card information, or they could get your information from this lead gen form. Be careful. Maybe you don't want to fill that thing out. And that is the opposite of the trust we were just trying to establish in this section, right? So these are all the different reasons why you need to do that SSL. There's a couple steps to it, but in the end, you get things secure, and it just looks good, and it's like a checkbox. And one way to test out if all those other images are or aren't going to freak out when you go over to the secure side is just to go to one of your Pardot landing pages right now, or one of the hosted files, and then just add that S in after HTTP. Put that S in there with a : / and the regular browser address. It'll make it secure, and then you'll see if anything doesn't load at the time. So that's the best way to approach that. But again, table stakes, you got to get this thing done. You got to get it validated, make sure it's set up. It's just what we got to do at this point. It's kind of like mobile-friendly landing pages, or mobile-friendly emails. You just got to do it at this point. All right, great. We've learned about all the different things we could test, so now we're probably dying to actually test them. And so let's talk about that next. Now, this is a bit of a busy slide, and I didn't put any fun graphics on it, but that's okay. We will suffer through this. No, it's an important slide. All this is a simple process just to get you thinking, what do you want to do when it actually comes time to do a test? Next, we'll talk about what are the different types of tests. But for this one, it's what process do we want to follow? Now, the reason we're doing this is because we don't just want to go ahead and, shoot from the hip kind of thing and just create a test and create another test and then see what happens. And honestly, I think we've all done that in the past. You may be doing that now. And now that we know there's a whole hierarchy of testing, we want to be a little more deliberate about it because the results we'll get will be much better. There's a crazy ratio I'm going to tell you about later about how not all tests actually come back with a winning result. Well, to make that number as efficient as possible, we want to be a little bit more deliberate. So first off, you want to start out with a goal. It always helps if you've identified a particular situation, like we need to capture more leads on this website. we want to, or this landing page, we want to increase the number of conversions, or these emails, or something like Cheshire, we have a blog email that goes out. We want to increase the number of people that are getting that email and then clicking through to the blog to read the article, right? That's a perfect goal. Whatever the goal might be, start with a goal in mind so that you can understand if you've actually reached it at the end, right? How many times have we not done that? So you have that first. Then you would create what's called a hypothesis. You may recall this back from junior high science class, or maybe even college, as they repeat the exact same thing you learned in high school. But creating a hypothesis is a question. It's a potential truth, right? You're not sure if it's true or not, but it's a statement. And a good example here is, I believe prospects aren't taking action on this page because the page is too busy, too noisy, and we need to reduce the content on it, right? That may be true. It may not be true, but it is a particular hypothesis to address your goal of getting more conversions on that website. With that hypothesis in mind, you then want to decide, what kind of a test do I want to do to figure out whether this is true or not, and then potentially get some improvement. So that's where you create a testing situation. This would be an A/B test or multivariate test, which we'll talk about next. And you'll say, okay, well, in order to do this, I'm going to, back to our early example, back to test these the noisy pages. I'm going to make I'm going to make a very quiet landing page with just a few things on it. And that'll be my testing situation. I'm going to A/B test the two together. And then you want to confirm your measurements. And this means you want to make sure you have stats on the existing asset. How's it doing? You need to know what your base case is and how much conversions you have from that first, or results, whatever result you're looking for. Do you have a base case? All these tests will go much better if you have a base case. When we talk about A/B testing, we're not saying create two random new things and test and see which one's better. We're saying start with something and then test against it. This is also why testing is CSI number 8, because I want you to build all the original control tests first. Build the original assets that we're going to test against so that we can get to this stage, we can really have some fun. All right, A/B testing, multivariate testing. Quite simply, A/B, you're looking at A, you're looking at B, and you're deciding which one's doing better. And if one does better, winner. Great, wonderful. Multivariate testing is saying, it's like A versus B versus C versus D. And what's really interesting about this is typically in best practice, right? Oftentimes, if I've been asked, what's a best practice of A/B testing? The best practice is you only change one thing, right? So if you're A/B testing an email in Pardot, and you want to maybe test the header image, great. Change the header image from one email to the other, and that's it. Why? Because if you change a whole bunch of things in that A/B test, then all you've really decided is, I did something better over here than I did over there. Now, you can still do that. That's totally fine. You may get a marked improvement. And some of our earlier examples did that, where they changed a whole bunch of things. The only challenge is you don't know what the actual trigger was that made that change. So the learning lesson is, well, this one's better, but I'm not sure why. It's much better to learn why it happened, or at least have a result that's statistically significant, which we'll talk about, and then understand why, as opposed to just making that change, then I hope it works, because you can repeat it later on when you do other tests. That being said, A/B is just literally one versus another, your control versus something else. Multivariate testing changes up the game. I said you can only test one thing, or you should only test one thing in A/B testing. The solution to that is multivariate testing, where we're changing up one thing on one page, on another page we're changing another aspect, on a third page we're changing the footer image, right? So you can change a whole bunch of different things. And with multivariate, it's not even as simple as like A versus B versus C versus D. It's actually going to look at changing the headline across the board, and then changing where the form placement is across the board, and changing those final text. It can actually look at all those different elements separately and decide, in conjunction, what's the best combination. That's technically what a multivariate test is. It's a little bit simpler in Pardot, but a true multivariate test can test all the things, is the phrase, right? You can test all the different changes you made all at the same time. And the only challenge is it requires lots of volume. So real quick, A/B test versus multivariate test. It's good to know the difference. And I gotta tell you, a lot of the technology out there, it just is just literally a glorified A/B test. Even if it's like an ABC test, it's still A/B testing. True multivariate testing is being able to change multiple things in different ways and being able to understand what are the different combinations. The Coke with the fries with the cheeseburger versus the cheeseburger, the onion rings, and the Sprite or water, right? Like all the different variables together, multivariate testing. If you're Amazon, you can test that for 4 minutes on your site and have have a whole cart full of data to analyze and understand. But that's not everybody. Of course, I do have Pardot, so that you may be here right now listening to this webinar. So, okay, A/B testing. Ideally, doing one change, or at least you're doing one version versus another. Very quick to set up. Very easy to test. I'm going to show you how in Pardot. You could just literally pull up the B version and change a word and hit send, and it's done. It'll go out, and you can wait some time and see what the results are. Very easy to do. It requires you just about your standard volume, a little higher than your standard volume. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're sending one version to one group, one version to the other group. So if it's an email, you have to just decide how much you want to chop off of the main group to be your testing group. That's fine. But if it's a landing page, if you're thinking about it, if your landing page, you're doing A/B testing and you've got 100 visitors, now 50 are going to one and 50 are going to the other. So now you've cut your traffic in half for both pages. So you need lots of traffic to be able to get enough results to prove that this wasn't just dumb luck. And so volume becomes really important. And that's why in the multivariate testing, works for Amazon, no problem, tons of volume. If you don't have enough volume, the more multivariate tests you have, the more factors you put in there, the way more higher volume you're going to need. So that's why it becomes challenging. It's super cool. You can test a lot more things faster. Just know that it just takes that much more volume. It's also a lot harder, not harder to set up, just takes more time to set up because you have to specify the different changes in the different sections. Now the Pardot, the landing page testing is called multivariate testing, but quite literally it is more of an A/B testing for landing pages. All right, let's get technical. We've been talking about Pardot for a little bit here, and just about everyone on here has Pardot, so welcome. If you don't, just sort of pretend and see if your tool can do this. So first of all, setting up A/B testing in the emails in Pardot, very cool process. But the sort of the preamble to that is Pardot Plus and Advanced Habits. So that which used to be Pro and Ultimate, whatever they want to call it, it's the middle and the highest version of Pardot. The standard version doesn't have it. So this should be one of those things that if you did eventually upgrade to the next higher level of Pardot, you would be able to do this, and it'd be really cool. So the way you find it, it's just in marketing, emails, and it's A/B testing. Very straightforward. If you can look over here, when you pull that up, it doesn't actually say create new A/B test. It says send new list email, because what you're going to find is this whole flow and this whole workflow is very much just like you're sending an email out. It's no different. It's just a couple tweaks to it that relates to A/B testing. And so you're basically following the whole flow of just sending a regular email out. And at the bottom, there's a little checkbox. You check that off to say, let's do some A/B testing first. So when you do that, you're going to get to this other page, and it's going to look exactly like the email building workflow. You're building the email, you're testing it, and you're sending it. It'll let you pick a template if you want. You can start from scratch. I think for this one, I pulled up that blog email that we have. You can subscribe to our blog, and we'll tell you all about it. But you'll see these emails going out. And so what you have here is the same workflow that you have. And I did see your question. So it's in the middle version and the highest version. So they call that, let me go back here real quick. They call it Plus and Advanced. Both of those do have it. It's just the standard one, the lowest one that doesn't have it. But the middle and the highest one do have it. That's a good question. So on this standard workflow, you will see all the things you've seen to send a regular email out. So it's like you don't have to learn a brand new process. The only difference is now there's a tab over here for a B email. There's an A email and a B email. And I've kind of crunched this graphic together so it fits on this slide deck, but that's okay. This is basically what you see. And again, you can click A, make some changes, click B, make some changes. I recommend you leave A the same. Always make A your control version, the version that you have been sending out. Make all your goofy changes on B. And just make that a standard practice so you'll never be confused about it. If you start making changes to the two of them, you'll never know what's going on. And also note that if you do make changes to A, then technically it's no longer the control, and now A is another test and B is another test, and now you're getting a little bit more like multivariate testing, but you also don't know what the improvement is. So you always want to leave A the same as what you have been sending, and then B is where you put the changes. And ideally it's like one change, or if you're doing a couple changes, try to keep them in the same category that we were talking about earlier in that hierarchy. Okay, let's make this a value testing B. Well, let's make a layout change here to B. But if you make a layout and a value change and a trust change all at the same time in B, you're not really going to know what's going on. So keep that in mind. Finally, the last part of the setup, again, you click right through that, you get right to sending, you get to sending, and you just scroll. Everything's the same in sending. Who do you want to come from? It's kind of neat. You actually have the ability to decide if you want the A email to come from Casey and B email to come from corporate@treasureimpact.com. So that's one thing you could test, right? You could leave A and B the exact same and just change who it's coming from. You could make A come from whoever it normally comes from and make B come from the sales rep that owns the account. Cool challenge, right? Cool test you could do. Didn't require you to make any changes to the email. All you're doing is changing the person up top. But again, what was the goal of this particular test, right? So you can see there's 1,000 things you could test here. So you got to start with a goal so you can at least work toward a result. So finally, in this last part for the A/B testing, you're able to select how much time you want to wait before you send out the rest of the emails. And so how this works is you're going to send a percent of emails out to a group of people. And some of this, like down below, you can see it's 25%. So right now, 25% of the list, let's say I had 10,000 people on the list, 25% of those are going to get either A or B. And it's going to be like split evenly between the two. And then we're going to wait a day to see which one had more clicks or more opens. Now, I'd love to have a little more in terms of radio buttons here, right? I think I'd love to see conversions. You're going to see that on the landing pages, which is cool. But at least over here, all we have is opens and clicks. I hate opens, honestly. They're so fickle and they don't mean too much. If you want to do a specific open test, that's cool. As long as that's your goal, I won't hate on you. But I do much rather prefer clicks because it actually is something they did. Especially now that Pardot has gotten rid of the phantom clicks that spam software often has done in the past. Now they've gotten rid of the majority of those. The clicks are actually someone clicking, whereas the opens may or may not happen based on if Gmail's blocking your images or not, right? So opens is a little kind of fuzzy math. You could still test knowing that it's fuzzy math, but clicks are at least more substantial. And then finally, in terms of the days, 1 is fine. I've seen 1 to 3 is kind of what I've written here in terms of best practice, because yes, people will actually open your email, 4 and beyond, a week later. I'm probably guilty if you send me one of your emails of doing that same thing. If it's more of that, newsletter type of email, I might get to it eventually, right? Because it's not a personal email. Personal email, I might get to right away. But either way, 1 to 3 is good because you want to get this thing out, right? We don't want to spend our whole time testing here. Let's get some results and let's get this thing out. And what's going to happen is the winner of that 20, in this case, 25% that receive the test, the most clicks or the most opens, whichever one you choose, all the rest, in this case, the rest of the 75 will go out to the remaining ones. All right, let's keep going because we want to make sure we get all this stuff in here. Here's the results, and you can see the winner had 9% more opens, and so the remaining emails went out to that person. That's what it looks like. Finally, on this, only one slide for this because it's much more straightforward on the landing page testing. They call it multivariate testing. I got to tell you, it's basically A/B testing because you're not testing different sections within each landing page in a true multivariate fashion. What you're doing is you're testing different landing pages against each other. Now, the interesting thing is you can have multiple landing pages and you're all testing to see which one's the best landing page. But really, that's like an A plus B plus C plus D test as opposed to the different elements within the page. So this is, again, just testing different landing pages against each other. If you do 2, it's an A/B test. If you do 3, is it really a multivariate? Well, I guess it is, because you've got a C in there, an A, B, and C. And notice what you can do is you can say, you know, this landing page gets 50% of the traffic. This landing page gets 50% of the traffic. I would never unweight that. I would want that evenly weighted so that my results were as clear as possible. And what you end up doing is you get a single URL, and you send your traffic to that single URL, and you can make it a short URL. You can even give it a vanity name so it doesn't look goofy like that tracking link down there. But what happens is 50% of the traffic will get that one template, and the other 50% of the traffic with the other template. And then you'll see down here, it'll tell you the views, and then it'll tell you the conversions. And again, you need some volume here. We need to see enough people go through these pages so that it's not just like, oh, well, 10 were over here and 9 were over here. That's not enough. You got to get some legit volume. But that's how you do it in Pardot. Very straightforward. So let's quickly address the testing traps in this last part. And again, I'm glad we have the time to address this, if ever so brief, because these are the traps that can actually eliminate all the value that you created in all the previous steps. First of all, statistical significance, as hard as it may be to say, is incredibly important. And I got to tell you, I don't believe any of the Pardot interfaces are actually caring about this. They're just literally telling you 9 people opened this one, 8 people opened this one, so we sent to whichever one had the most. That's okay for that kind of a just like, we'll send to whichever one works, right? But you got to understand that that doesn't mean that it wasn't just fluke and chance. And so the idea of statistical significance means, this is a mathematical thing, right? Prove to me that the visitors in this example here, visitors to A versus the visitors to B, was it just luck, right? Because sometimes luck, you flip a coin a few times, it may be heads more often than not. But if you flip it enough, it'll be 50-50. So these are the same kind of challenges. What can happen is, if you don't have enough volume, again, we were talking about that earlier, if you don't have enough volume, if you're only testing a particular example on 20 people, you basically need like 19 of them to all choose one versus the other. Because if you have 11 choose one and 9 choose the other, is that really significant? No, it wouldn't. So this is a deep rabbit hole that would take a whole webinar to talk about. And I think a few people, probably a couple people out there, raise your hands if you just want to go crazy on math. It would be all about that. Other people like, let's keep this light and fun here on Thursday. Well, it's a rabbit hole, but one of the best things you can do, you can read on the different, there's different formulas for it to really calculate out. There's a chi test, there's P, there's C, there's all these different letters, different formulas. Highly recommend Google A/B test calculator. This one, the A/B test guide, it's great, simple. And what it's doing all the equations behind the scenes, but we're just trying to see, is the number high enough? Do we have enough volume for the results? Now, if the results are like, if it's a runaway, then you don't need as many visitors, right? You don't need as many tests if it's a complete runaway. But if the numbers are kind of close, it very well may just be chance. And the reason you need to know that is because rather than going ahead and changing your whole strategy based on this new thing you tested, it may not be any better than the current one you're doing. So a lot of people spend way too many cycles improving their whole website based on some learning they think they got from a test, which was actually just a little bit lucky on one side versus the other. So really important, hit up the A/B test calculator and play around with it even. So, I played around with this earlier today. This is one simple A/B test guide. It's a good one. It actually tells you in English too. And I put 20 here, 20 there. And I've got that example I gave you earlier, and it said, you don't have enough data. The results don't necessarily show that A is actually better than B. They don't show anything. It's important to see that, because then that'll just tell you mathematically, you may just be looking at, nothing really came from this test. And that's going to happen more often than not. In fact, that's going to happen 6 out of 7 times. You're not going to be statistically significant. It's going to be kind of like a toss-up, which means, okay, it's not really anything to bet the farm on. Maybe we try a different test, but don't stop if you don't get statistical significance the first time, because technically you need to be doing 1 out of the seven, 1 out of the 7 will actually be a winner. 1 out of the 7 is an industry average, will be a winner that's statistically significant. And something that you might be one of those results from earlier with like the 400% improvement, right? So keep going, keep testing. But I got a theory about 1 in 7. Here's my theory. 1 in 7 marketing tests win. They're significant. They have a result. But I also found this other stat online today. And it said that 1 in 7 people are actually members of a gym. Anyone out there a member of a gym? Go ahead and throw it in there. Do you do a local one? Do you have your own gym in your own home? Yeah, throw it in the chat. Tell us what you're up to. Oh, yep, got a couple in there. So members of gyms, well, guess what? Basement gym. Well, you know what? If you're a member of a gym, and I don't know what the home gym fits, well, 1 in 7 people are members of a gym. 1 in 7 people win, marketing tests win. So here's my theory. My theory is that only marketers that attend a gym get winning tests. What does everyone think about that? Is that valid? Does that make sense? Yeah, Tina, go to the gym, right? Oh, yeah, Kat, exactly. Go to the gym. You'll have a successful marketing. Gym life. Michaela, love it, right? Does anyone buy this logic? If so, I've got a lot of things to sell you. Great questions. We'll definitely get to those at the end. But so does anyone buy this logic? Go ahead and let me know if you buy this logic, and we'll send you a contract. We'll send you a DocuSign contract. All right. I see a couple no's in a couple different places. So no, you don't buy the logic. And this illustrates another important point. And you may have heard this before, may have heard it in science class and not really cared. Or whatever the case may be, but correlation versus causation. They're these two things. They start with C. They both end in shun. And then people get confused all the time, especially marketers. And then we do a whole lot of extra work. Just like at the beginning, without statistical significance, we're doing work. We're making dramatic changes when it was just dumb luck. The same thing can happen when you see two different numbers and they have nothing to do with each other. Look at the example here. Marketunist. Tom Fishburne, awesome guy. He was actually on the podcast, super incredible. Talked about how to be creative consistently. Amazing guy. But here's the deal. Sales have gone up, shaved heads. The number of people with shaved heads has gone up. So I guess they're in line. They both seem to follow each other. So everyone off with the hair, right? Well, that doesn't make any sense. So that's a good example of correlation. The same numbers or trend are happening, but there's no connection. The shaved heads did not cause the sales to go up, or at least not that we can prove here from these early stats. It's not enough just to look at the numbers and say that one proved the other. That would be causation. And it's important that just because numbers change or improve because of different tests we're doing, we want to make absolutely sure that what we did was the cause and not just happen to be related to it. And so a couple solutions on here, the ability to repeat a test. If you repeat it, get the same results. This happens in science all the time. You do that. That shows that you have something to work with here. Another one, use a control. Remember earlier we said don't change A, make A your control. That's so you can make sure you're not messing with correlation and causation. Have a control. Have one stat that's your baseline. Finally, be aware of your own bias. Sometimes, and I'm very guilty of this, I think, well, that form is disgusting. We got to change this landing page based on what I feel, right? And it's important to note that these biases are everywhere, and we could technically read the data incorrectly. We can even create a test. We can create a hypothesis all built in with our bias. It can be really challenging, but it's really helpful to have like a peer review of that, or bounce it off a coworker, bounce it off us, send it to me, Casey@CheshireImpact.com. Send it our way, and just have somebody else look at the data and say, is that really the case, or is it something else? All right, in wrapping up here, and then we'll get to Q&A. Great optimization resources here. Conversion scientist, Brian Massey, super fun guy. It was a great interview. We're going to have him come back and chat more with us. I learned a bunch on that episode. A lot of the great examples from this webinar came from him on that show. So definitely check that out. There's a great book to check out, Waiting for Your Cat to Bark. It's all about what people ignore, and also persuading your customers when they really don't want to see what you're sending, right? It goes back to value and some of those lessons we talked about. Mech Labs, they have a lot of great case studies. This is what it started with. This is what it ended with. Here are the differences. Crazy Egg had a lot of those too. And your Chesh team, if you're working with someone at Cheshire Impact, ask them, what have they seen? And if there's an interesting experiment we want to try, ask them, and they can even ask the rest of the Chesh team. And we can say, what have we seen? Is there some cool thing that might really help on the value side or might really help on the layout side? We've got some great layouts too for landing pages. So if your landing pages are crazy, just hit us up and say, let's design some better ones. So there's a lot of great resources for you here. And then finally, last part, Cheshire Impact. We're here to help you, right? So here to teach, here to share, but we can also just pick up the wrench and help you build it too. And the real call to action, if you haven't done a CSI, that Cheshire Success Index, you can even say it in the chat. This is how crazy it is. You can tweet it. It's like dominoes. You can tweet it. You can say it in the chat. You can say it in the Q&A. You can say, give me a CSI. You can send me an email, casey@CheshireImpact.com. Any of these different channels, smoke signals. I do have a window. I'm looking out the window and say, I want to get a CSI. I want to find out where I'm at with marketing automation. So that is free. There's no charge to that. We want you to know where you're at and what your next step is. Finally, keep on this list. We've got CSI workshops. So everything we've talked about today, we actually have interactive workshops so we can help you out with these different aspects. We can also help you execute the campaigns itself. There's a book on marketing automation coming out. And I want to keep you all in the loop on that. Testing will definitely be in it. And then finally, if you haven't already subscribed, check out the Hardcore Marketing Show. And that's it. All right. Thank you all for coming. We are going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we're going to get into your questions.